Okay, so can we get next slide? Hopefully. Bay tree, yay! Okay, so this is a bay tree in my garden. Very useful plant. Actually, this is the very first infused oil that I made was with a bay, and they're quite nutritional. Of course, you know you can use them in culinary use as well, but they're high in vitamin A, vitamin C, iron, potassium, and calcium. So I have used them actually to just infuse with oils and maybe just rub onto your skin, because not very many people have allergies to bay, so it's a nice oil to use, and quite aromatic, of course, as well. And the other lovely thing about it is you don't really have to dry it, because it is actually evergreen, so it'll be in your garden the whole of the year. And it's nice to have herbs that actually have that evergreen presentation, which means that you don't necessarily have to be drying them. You can go out in December and pick to your heart's content. Okay, next slide, Marianne. Melon. Now this, surprisingly, this is nearly in flower now with me. This is actually what I would call a volunteer. They come up in my garden just really as weeds. It's Verbascum thapsus is a botanical name for it. So it is a wilder form of some of the garden Verbascums that we would have that would be more ornamental. This one comes up with a huge spike, gets to about 5 foot from a tiny seedling from March time, so, but it's on a huge amount of growth, very, very soft leaves, very tactile plant actually, but quite often it's the flower spike that would be used and it's quite good for ear infections, so you can use it as an oil and drop it into the ear. It's also used for like all sort of like bronchial infections, coughs, to treat fevers, sore throats, and also earache as well. So you'll be taking it as a tea, a hot tea, because it will be the top part of your body, is how I would be taking something like that, or else an infused oil if you were going to drop it into your ear. Next slide, Marianne. Okay, sage. Sage is one of my favourite go-to herbs. I've got a lovely old plant in the garden. It's the purple sage, as you can see there, but that makes absolutely no difference whether it's purple or pure green. They're both Salvia officinalis. Anything that says officinalis usually means that it also can be used in a herbal way. It's, in a way, the common form of something, and quite often it's the wilder form, the native form, that would be native to our own climate. A sage is quite often, quite famously used for hot flushes, for the menopause. Most people would drink it as a tea for that, or in a tablet form. It also will reduce cholesterol, so it's another thing to be thinking about if you were on the border of maybe having to go onto like a medication to reduce your cholesterol. You could try sage tea. It's also quite good for hair health, so it's something that I've been particularly interested in as I investigate liquid conditioning rinses. I'm going to be putting this plant into one of those. And again, it's an evergreen plant, so it's lovely in the fact you've in the garden the whole of the year. Mine is just about starting to produce flowers now, so I do try to use shoots before they flower. Generally, the reason for that is because the energy will go into the flowers. So if you're using it for herbal and medicinal uses, you probably want to get the benefit of the plant in its entirety, and not where it's sort of putting its energy into flowers, unless you're using the flowers, of course, for your storage or your medication. That's fine. But in my case, it's usually the leaves that I use if I'm using it. So I sort of try to avoid ones that are actually producing flowers whenever I'd be going to pick. The other thing you can use them for is smudge sticks, which is, I know people use the Californian white sage, but there's no reason why you couldn't use the like of mugwort, the artemisia, rosemary, thyme, and sage, and make your own. and it's just a matter of getting your herbs together and binding them with a little bit of string and letting them dry in situ, and you can use that for smudging. Smudging is actually quite often it was used to remove negative energy from people or rooms, and it was to produce a little bit of acrid smoke to get rid of like bad bacteria. So it's interesting, you know, whenever we think about coronavirus and things, that nobody's really sort of running around hospitals saging rooms. They're all out with hand sanitizer, of course, instead. But it's interesting when you look into the history of smudging, and sage is one of the key ingredients for that. So next slide, Marianne. Now this is feverfew. And feverfew, it's just about coming into flower with me now, but it's kind of strange because it's normally it would be in flower, so I think it's been the dry season. It's an interesting little plant. It'll grow in gravel with me. It's not made much growth this year, obviously, because it's been so dry, but normally even in gravel it'll be up and flowering. It's quite often it's used for migraines, headaches, and of course fever, which is of course the common name feverfew. Tanacetum is the botanical name for it. It also has been used to create or to ease stomach aches, menstruation, and arthritis. Now you can use the leaf or the flower. It's a lovely little plant actually to use even to cut, because the leaves, whenever you touch them, of course the aromatic oils are released with most herbs, so you get that sort of smell of the tanacetum itself, and the flowers last really well whenever they're cut and put into bouquets as well, so it's a nice little plant to use for that. So next slide. Okay, so that is peppermint. I wonder, has it missed a couple of slides? You didn't see anything else?
It's probably
anyway. Yeah, it's maybe just jumped.
It's probably me missing it in a hurry.
Oh, right, okay, right. So peppermint, this is a prolific herb with me. All of the mints I keep in pots. I just wouldn't let them out into the ground. They're a mile a minute. Unless you had a very dry area, perhaps, you know, that you could sort of contain them in. They're inclined to run amok. Spearmint is another that'll do the same thing, but I find peppermint and spearmint, they sort of can be used in similar ways. Quite often peppermint would be famous for headache use or IBS, digestive issues. Most of the mints are very good for calming the digestive system. Energy and mood swings, of course, because they are so aromatic. I often find that peppermint, especially as an essential oil, is a very uplifting scent. It gives you a bit of, you know, viva voom, and to me, I would like using it in the morning rather than in the evening. So I'd be inclined to be going for much smooth essential oils like lavender in the evenings, but in the mornings I'd be wanting to putting on peppermint. Next slide, Marianne. Oh, and that's the spearmint beside it. Again, I find both of these herbs really do like moisture, and the spearmint in particular gets very sad if it's too dry. So I find I have to water them quite a bit in pots, just the way this spring has been. I use both of these actually they make a lovely herbal tea, and I use them like 50% each. And I find that the peppermint can sometimes be a little bit overpowering, and the spearmint has a sweeter texture to it. So I think the two of them complement each other quite well. And I'll make the tea in the morning, especially on a hot day, and I'll drink it cold. So I'll put it into the fridge, make it first of all, and then I'll put it in the fridge, and I'll keep it in the fridge for 2 or 3 hours until it's well chilled. And it's a lovely drink to have in the late afternoon, just if you've been outside and you've been gardening, it's been quite hot or whatever else. It's very refreshing to be able to drink later on in the day, cold. But spearmint, it's high in antioxidants. It's good for lowering blood sugar. So anybody perhaps who's heading towards type 2 diabetes should be drinking it as a tea. Again, good for digestion because, of course, it's mint. Also, it has that link with memory, as does rosemary. Both of them seem to be like a memory herb. It's also high in vitamin C and A and potassium. All of the mints actually are very easy to identify from the fact they've got a square stem. And if you even went out late at night and felt leaves and you know, it's a way of working with identification of plants is to sort of, you know, look at everything, not only the sort of scent that they bring, the flowers, the shape of the stems, how the leaves come out of the stems, the height they are, should they be flowering at this time of the year, all of those little indicators about how to, whenever you're identifying it, you're really keying it out in your head that it is what it's saying in the textbook, especially if you're going to be using them, as I've said before. Next slide, Marianne. Fennel. Fennel is, it doesn't have very many friends. It seems to be a herb that likes to be by itself. It doesn't do sort of much in the way of companion planting. Most plants sort of complement each other, but fennel sort of does its own thing. Of course, fennel seed is particularly useful, especially fennel tea. You know, it's much stronger if you're making it from the seed than from the young shoots. It's a very pretty plant. Quite good for cutting as well in the garden. I have the bronze fennel, and of course it seeds about, because I do let it seed, and it comes through as bronze, but you can obviously have the green fennel as well. Both of them will be equally beneficial for anything that you want to use from as way of herbalism is concerned. The fact that it's bronze and more ornamental doesn't take away from its herbal benefits. It's quite good for blood pressure, indigestion, of course. Anybody who remembers babies with colic, fennel would have been used in some of the little gripe water, I think it used to be. Gripe water used to be full of alcohol, apparently, years and years ago. And I don't know if it's still available now or not, but I know my eldest child was a bit colicky, and gripe water was still on the go then, and it was very aniseedy in flavour coming from the fennel. Again, just to try and ease their little digestions and stop them from bloating. It's also good for constipation and asthma, and it's high in potassiums. And again, the seed is a very good way of being able to use it in the winter months. You can dry it, of course, if you want to. You can dry the herb, but I think the fennel seeds are actually much stronger in flavour. It doesn't take as many of them either, and it would be a good way of being able to use them over the winter if you wanted to do that. Next slide. Rosemary. Rosemary, again, we talk about memory herb. The lovely thing about, I wouldn't really be without rosemary. I had a plant in the garden for about 15 years, and it was a weeping form, and I had it coming over my front wall. And unfortunately, in 2013, we had that horrendous real ice storm, and it never survived it. And I managed, I had it actually in my mum's garden. I managed to propagate it again from my mum's garden and get it going again. And now I have a fairly decent plant coming back over the wall, again in the same position the last one was in. But it took about 2 or 3 years because I had problems with trying to get it to root. And even whenever I planted it out, it didn't seem to want to grow. But eventually it did do what it was supposed to do. Lovely plant. I wouldn't be without rosemary. It's very good for cutting as well. It's got quite a strong stem. It'll stay very well if you're using fall foam. It's good for the digestion, of course. It's very good in the kitchen for any sort of like culinary purposes. It's also evergreen, so you've got that plant who will still be there in the middle of December whenever you run out. It'll have It'll have leaves ready for you to pick. Good for arthritis and fibromyalgia as well. And also interesting, I find rosemary is something I've been doing quite a lot of reading on for hair. So it's very much a hair herb. It seems to be used for all sorts of hair problems, including hair loss. So it seems to sort of work very well with all sorts of scalp conditions, hair, bringing glossy shine into hair, and of course the essential oils as well coming from the herb. So a good all-rounder. So great plant. There was a couple of slides we missed. One was thyme, which is quite a small little herb. I always find thyme quite strong, but for all the size of it, it really does pull a punch. It's best growing in really free-draining soil. I find actually, even though I'm on the coast and I would have a good free-draining soil, I still grow it in a pot. I find it's happier in a pot. I think it nearly gets up to the sunshine a little bit more too. It's a very small herb, so it can be overlooked from some aspects because it seems to take quite a lot of it to do anything, but very, very strong. Good for the immune system as well. It also reduces inflammation. I'm going to be putting it into one of the hair rinses. It's also known for courage and strength. So it's interesting that a very tiny plant that you could just basically walk on and not even notice is actually, assigned to courage and strength, even being so small. It also is rich in vitamin C and vitamin A, copper and iron. So it's a lovely plant to have in the garden. Just make sure you've got free draining compost, or put a bit of extra grit in when you're planting it. But it's such a tiny leaf, and it's very easy to dry because it is such a small leaf. So it's a good plant to have. And again, it's evergreen, so you should be able to nip out in the middle of December and use it. You should be able to use it for your Christmas dinner for the stuffing, because it will be in the garden and it will be evergreen. So I think the next slide takes us on to wilder plants, does it? Or different ways to store. I know I've talked a little bit about this just whenever we were trying to get the slides to go, but different ways of storing. It's an interesting way of looking at the abundance that's around you at the moment and thinking about what do I do in the middle of November. That's how I usually think about things. So picking and drying in the cupboard, making an infusion in oil. So to make an infusion in oil, I think I will have some slides on for along which will show it, but you need to keep it at a very low temperature, because oils obviously have a very high boiling point, or low boiling point. So you have to keep it really just on a very, very light simmer to make an infusion. Making a tincture, I've already talked a little bit about how to make a tincture, but you're using just vodka. The reason why you quite often use vodka to make a tincture is the fact that vodka doesn't really have any flavour to it. So it's not to say it's going to be sickly sweet or whatever. And it's also clear, so it gives you an indicator of how much the herb is taking up the tincture whenever you look at it. Vinegar is exactly the same way as a tincture in many respects. It lasts for a good space of time. Again, shelf life of vinegar is probably maybe 3 years. Wouldn't just be quite maybe as high as alcohol, but I'd say maybe 2 to 3 years with vinegar would easily be fine. Because it's quite acidic, it's obviously not going to build up bacteria, and it will keep your herb contained within the vinegar. So you would have it as a use, and you could use it on perhaps salad dressings or putting it into soups or stews or whatever else if you want to take it, because I know vinegar is quite hard to take. It's quite astringent, and it's a way of just being able to add extra goodness into your food and into your body. And most herbs will work really well in a vinegar. With all of these things, like a vinegar or a tincture, I allow the herb to sit in the vinegar or the alcohol for a full month. So it really gets a good chance to infuse, and just let it sit in normal room temperatures. If you want to, you can give it a shake every time you think about it. And also keep it sort of slightly dark area. Don't have it in sort of like pure sunlight again. I'd be inclined to keep them in a cupboard. They're not sort of they're not getting confused with sunlight as well. And again, another way of being able to have herbs for 12 months of the year is to freeze them. So you can actually pick them fresh, and you can take them and you can put them, freeze them in ice cubes if you want to, pack them into ice cubes with a little bit of water. I mean, parsley is an ideal one for that if you want to use parsley in the winter months, and you want to put them into like a stew or a soup or whatever else. A little bit of water in an ice cube tray, they'll freeze like that, and then you can use them straight away into your dish that you're going to use. Some people actually pack them in and then just sort of scrape them off the forks. Another way if you could do something like that as well. But I'll go into a little bit more depth of that whenever I get into the infusions and the tinctures. So next slide, Marianne. So identification is, it's quite hard to do over Zoom, but again, it's making yourself aware of following certain protocols when you're out picking in the countryside. These are plants that you're going for a walk. They will not have a nursery label on them saying I am a hawthorn or I am an elderflower. And there are plants in the hedgerows that actually would be quite harmful, so it's something to always bear in mind whenever you're out. What I say to people is don't pick near a busy road. You don't want to have exhaust fumes. And also, if you're picking in the countryside and it's maybe perhaps close to your house, is a good indicator from an area that you know. You maybe know who the landowner is. They've given you permission to pick. If you feel uncomfortable, you can just ask them. And also, you know their practices. So there will be nothing as horrible of having something in your cupboard that you're going to use later on, and you come down the lane after a couple of days and realise that all the plants are starting to bow their heads where they've been sprayed, and you've actually picked the plant and brought it into your house and you've been drying it. So it's just observations. Does a plant look ill? Does a plant look fresh? Does a plant look happy? Is the plant what it should be? And again, that's coming in, looking at the leaves very carefully. Do the leaves look like what they should be as far as that species is concerned? Is it in the right flowering month? So, for instance, if I was out and I seen elderflower in flower about September time, I would think something weird has happened. But that doesn't mean to say that it's not elderflower. It could be sometimes plants go into like a second flower, but quite often if they're flowering in March, whenever they should be flowering in the end of June, I would be saying it's not that plant because it's way out of its season. Just everything about the plant. If you're uncertain and it's a biggish plant, I'd pick up high. The reason why I say that is because you've got the like of hogweed and various other plants of that sort of similar family, those like little spray flowers, and they're white, and they're in flower in May and into June. So it's a time there's a lot of plants in flower, and it could be very easy just to pick something up and think, oh, I know what you are. I know of one lady who made elderflower cordial out of hogweed. Thankfully, somebody told her that she'd picked the wrong plant to use it. So before she got a chance to give it to her grandchildren, she was able to realise her mistakes and she had to put it down the sink. So again, it's just being very, very careful. As I talked about before, you know, using your sixth sense to some extent. Check everything about the plant. Does the foliage look right? Does the stems look right? Is it the right height? Is it growing in shade when you know it loves to go in full sun and it shouldn't even produce flowers in shade? All of the little indicators that sort of tell you how a plant behaves in public. And if it's not behaving how it says it should be behaving, I would be doubting myself whether actually it is the right plant or not. And especially when you're out wildcrafting, it doesn't do any harm to walk on and find another one on further down the lane, because that might be the right one. So, you know, whenever you're looking at Irish native plants, there's usually more than one plant in your area. So if you're a little bit uncertain, go and check out another one. And also other people, you know, all people have different sorts of knowledge. So someone would say to you, oh, there's a lovely hawthorn up the lane, or there's an elderflower over there. And so if you're not sure, somebody else will give you an indicator that, you know, you were on the right path, or this is the right plant to use. All of those little things. It's very hard on Zoom. I say quite often these sort of things that I would go into a lot more depth into, but I would be using it actually as indicators whenever you're out. Sometimes it doesn't do any harm to even just close your eyes and feel the plant, because I think that also gives you, you can sense more whenever you're actually not trying to do everything by your eyesight. You'll maybe find a scent to the foliage that maybe should be correct. Or if you know, if you're using the foliage, make sure that the foliage is clean and healthy. If you're going to use the foliage instead of flowers, if that's what it is, or berries, just make sure whatever you're picking is healthy. You wouldn't want to be putting something into your body that actually looks a bit unsavory, or chewed by an animal, or chewed by insects. You know, pick plants that are actually happy and healthy. And the other thing we touched on the other night is about thanking plants. So it's not just about going out and picking abandonedly and coming up with it and picking all the flowers off the plant. You should be, as we call about the wildcrafting way, it's always leaving something for nature. So you pick maybe 5 or 6 blossoms of one plant, and then you move on to another one. You don't take everything, you leave enough for the insects and the bees, and for the plant to produce seed. And what I do is I sort of like a natural habit is whenever I go up to the plant, I just in my mind, I talk to it and I ask it, can I pick it? And it's an old herbalism way, I suppose, of just respect and respecting plants and respecting nature. So you should actually just ask before you pick. And one of the things I'm always concerned about whenever I'm buying anything over the internet is, you know, has that actually happened? And it probably hasn't happened. But it's something that you can do for yourself, especially if you're using them for yourself and your health and your family's health. Okay, Marianne, next slide. So we get to the wild plants. This is the ones we've just been talking about. And of course, nettle is our go-to plant. This is a nice healthy nettle that I've actually allowed to grow in one of my flower beds in my garden at the moment, because it was just so nice. And I couldn't pull it up. And I thought, you know what, I'll use you nicely first of all. So I made a nice soup with him. I said him, because he was quite stingy. And I probably will have to do something later on, because I obviously wouldn't have that yellow root running right through the flower bed, and he would just absolutely love to do that. But I just allowed him to cohabit beside a dianthus in the background and 2 of the other plants, but he will have to go very soon, I'm afraid. It's the way of it, isn't? But you know, nettles they're very, very useful plants for the caterpillar as well. So you know, they've got other things as well, and they're really good nutritious plants. So you've got lots of like vitamins sits within the nettles, which is why quite often they're used as a tonic in the spring. A, C, K, and they've also got iron, potassium and silicon. They're good for anemia and eczema, rheumatoid arthritis. I've actually heard of people who actually sting themselves with nettles. I know that sounds kind of severe, but apparently it is very good, because what it does is it stimulates blood flow to the skin. So anybody who's got really you know, has problems with arthritis and maybe is having joint problems, you can actually hit yourself with a nettle. Sounds lovely, doesn't it? To bring the blood flow to the area and to stimulate I suppose if you have rheumatoid arthritis, you probably be on painkillers anyway. Maybe you don't feel the nettle, but I know of people that have done that. It's also good for prostate problems, urinary tract infections, and also it's very good for flushing the body from toxins. So a nettle tea, for instance, would probably have you running off to the toilet fairly quickly, which would be quite good if you're trying to get rid of excess fluid. So a really good all-round plant to have. Sorry?
Can I ask about that? Can I literally go into my garden, lift the nettles, bring them in and make tea? Is that?
Yes, you can do. If you're making tea, you can use the top part of the nettle quite easily. If you're putting them into, say, a soup, I would only use the top 2 or 3 leaves, so the growth point with 2 or 3 leaves. Other than that, they get quite stringy. So you should just use the top if you're putting them into a soup. But if you're putting them into a tea where you're just straining off the liquid, you could use, something like 6 inches long quite easily, and make a tea from them like that. It's not an unpleasant tea actually. It's quite sort of slightly astringent, but it's quite spicy in a way. It's quite nice.
You boil it then? You boil it for a certain amount of time, or?
Oh well, I'll go into that on a later slide. You know how I make tea anyway. Is everybody's got their own, I suppose, different way of making it. But yeah, usually at least 10 minutes of an infusion, at least 10 minutes, if not a little bit longer, just to get the benefit of the herb out. So very, very useful herb. What I do actually with nettles is whenever they come up in the spring, you get your spring flush. And that would be sort of like April time is a good time to go out and pick your nettles. But you can pick nettles right through the whole of the growing season, because all you need to do is just take them, and you either can trim them or you can just cut them with a pair of shears, take them back down to close towards the ground again, and they'll put up more flushes. So that's that young flush that you want all the time. Just the top, and try and get them before the flower and set seed as well. So nettles are starting to flower and seed now, so you could cut those down and you got a second flush. Again, as I talked about, if you let them flower, they're putting their energy into that, and the goodness comes out of the foliage. So if I was using them for a tea, I'd want them to be like they look like in that photograph, where they're young growth and they're not producing flowers at that stage. They're still on the sort of the growth run. And I'd say that for most herbs. So next one, Marianne. So plantain. Now plantain is a lovely little herb. I have great respect for this. And I've made a little infusion, which I'll show you on a later slide. Plantain is sort of like an anti-itching or anti-irritant. It's a member of the hosta family, and when you look at it there, you sort of can see a hosta looking out of it. It's like a baby hosta. But it's interesting where plantain grows, and that photograph shows everything to you. That's just up the back of the drive here, just up to the soap studio where I'm sitting at the minute, and we gravelled it. And the plantain is coming up through the gravel. Plantain grows where it really gives itself a hard time. It likes to get downtrodden on. And I've often seen it growing along little bridle paths or somewhere where people are actually walking, where the grass and it sort of don't compete as much. And because it's quite a big leaf area, it seems to be able to sort of survive in that situation. Plantain is also known as psyllium husks. You'll see it quite often in health food shops, where they actually let it come up and produce its flowers and its seeds. And it's the seeds that is what they use for psyllium in the husks. That is actually the seed form. But I just like to use it as the leaf. And I have seen me using this actually, at this time of the year, we get the horse flies out whenever you get a bit of moisture in there and you get those horrendous bites. And sometimes you'll see the horsefly and it's already bitten you, and sometimes you don't notice it until it has bitten you. If you look around and you find a bit of plantain, rub it onto your hands until it becomes dark coloured in the leaf, and it's actually starting to sort of break down. And when you get it to that level, rub it onto your bite, And if you just rub it on, and just rub it on for about maybe like 2 or 3 minutes, just keep rubbing it in, letting the sap come out of the plant and onto your skin. And you might have a green mark on your skin. And if you apply that every time it gets a little bit sore, over the next couple of hours, you will have no bite. It's unbelievable. I've seen myself getting bitten by wasps and being able to rub that onto my skin. So it's really, in a way, anti-inflammatory. And it's one of my go-to herbs. If I get bitten by something, I'll be looking for a piece of plantain on the ground where I stand. And quite often you'll find one within a metre or two of where you're standing. And you just pick it and away you go. It's a great plant. But for you can also use it for sunburn. You can use it for acne and scars, and you also can take it internally for indigestion and heartburn. But I've never taken it internally, but presumably you would take it as a tea for something like that. So Marianne, next slide.
Can I just ask, is that the broadleaf version?
Yes, the broadleaf is major, Plantago major, but you also can use Plantago lanceolata, which is the long thin one. They both do exactly the same thing. You'll find that the broadleaf likes to grow on a flattened surface where it's got a little bit of extra light. Whereas I find if you go into a meadow, you'll find the lanceolata, the more like the spear-like shaped one, will grow in longer grass, and it seems to be happier in that situation. Quite often that's the one that you see coming into flower and seed as well.
And does this, because do they have the broadleaf one, does it have slightly reddish flowers?
No, it doesn't. It has brown flowers.
Oh, maybe they're brown.
Greeny brown, yes. And then it's quite interesting because when it comes up, it looks like there's like little aerial seeds coming off the spike, and they're always white, and then they turn brown. So that's actually it's probably the pollen is white on them, but they're nearly always brown, to be honest.
Well, that's probably me just describing it badly, but I was just thinking they like have like fronds, and then so yeah, like you say, the seeds. Oh yeah, okay, good. Just identifying it.
Okay, we've got hawthorn is the next one. So we've talked about the hawthorn for the heart, and quite often it's the berries that would be used. They're high in vitamin C as well, but it's I often think of hawthorn, as soon as I see it, I think of the heart, and think it's, they both begin with H perhaps. And you also can eat the young foliage as it unfurls in the spring. Why sometimes you just see the hawthorn coming out about March time. They're quite nice in salads when they're very, very young. You can eat them at any time of the year, but I think whenever they're young, they're nice and fresh, and they're not bitter at all, and they're sort of slightly crunchy, so they're quite nice in salads. But it's good for anxiety, of course, again, the heart, blood vessels. It's good for high blood pressure as well, indigestion, stomach pains, and for the kidneys. So again, it's a good flushing herb, so it will flush the kidneys. So you can use the flowers, you can use the leaves, and you can use the berries, so all parts of the plant. And of course, you can't go past hawthorn without thinking about fairies. So you've got your fairy thorn again. And of course, it's a plant for the Irish countryside because it's used in most of the hedgerows here with its spines to keep the animals in their fields, and also to give them shelter as well. And then you've got the abundance of berries in the autumn time to feed the birds. So it's very much a plant, I think, for the British Isles. Okay, Marianne, next slide. Okay, dandelion. So dandelion, of course, I think it's hard to be doing something with dandelions whenever they're in full flower. In March time, you're just driving along the countryside and there's just dandelions everywhere. Really good for the solitary bees, of course. In the early spring, one of the first sort of rich nectar plants for the solitary bees to be able to come out and feed on. And it's soul destroying whenever you see so many of them being sort of sprayed out. But dandelions have quite a nice herbal use, actually. They're they're high in potassium, so they'd be quite good for to take as a tea. You can also eat them in young salads. I have a mix of salad leaves at the moment, and it has a dandelion within it with a red rib, so it's a very ornamental dandelion, but you can eat it. So I've been eating it actually as part of my salads for my new raised bed. So it's interesting, and I'm also going to be putting it into one of my hair rinses as well, because it's actually quite good for a certain hair type. But it's a good all-rounder. It's good for, I don't know what it is about yellow flowers, but quite often they're used for cleansing the liver. So they have the bitterness, and the bitters are good for going in and cleaning the liver, and also quite good for the lymphatic system as well. So dandelion would be quite a good thing to take as a tea. So you could pop it into maybe a mix of other herbs as well, because it is slightly astringent, but you could take it as a tea to get it into your system in that way, or as I eat it in salads. Quite good for anemia, but it's very high in quite a few vitamins, and it's kind of sad whenever you think that these plants are actually in the countryside and we could be using them, and everybody just sees dandelions as a nuisance and wants to spray them out. But you know, you've got A, B, C, K and E in one little plant, and they grow prolifically. Again, you can see here it's growing alongside the plantain on my driveway here up to Soap Studio. So you know, I'll be out picking that whenever I'm making my various herbal hair rinses. And again, you know, the ones in the polytunnel that I have probably will go to the hair rinses as well, because they'll be in the polytunnel getting all sorts of special treatment. So it's just, you know, it's inclined to be overlooked because it's so common and people don't like it, and it has a taproot, of course. It's quite a pernicious weed. And if you break the taproot, of course, it just comes back from that root again. But that just shows you how tough it is, to be honest, because it has to be to survive in the environment that it's growing in. Next slide, Marianne. Now we're into cleavers. I noticed cleavers. What was the other? Robin run the hedge. Robin run the hedge. So I've got lots of this in my garden. Very good for the lymphatic system. It's inclined to stick to your clothes. You'll get those little sort of green balls on your clothes if you've been out weeding. I blame the cats for bringing it into the garden, to be honest. It sort of seeds itself about underneath one of my shrubs, and of course it's very hard to get it all out, so it sort of seeds again. And so it has like 2 or 3 goes at seeding, and I'm going to have to find a way of using it. I've heard of people using it herbally to heal various things in animals, not so much humans, but it's a diuretic, so again it'll sort of flush out your system. It's quite good for the kidneys, obviously, and the urinary tract. So if you had like an infection, you possibly could use it as a tea. Also quite good for eczema. So it's funny to think that, because it has a sort of like a roughness to it, which is why it'll stick to your clothes. It has a way of climbing itself up plants to the sunlight, yet it's quite good for eczema, which is quite interesting. But again, very much seen as a cleansing herb for the lymphatic system, and for flushing out toxins. So a very useful little plant, and I say it's in every hedgerow that you look at this time of the year. Next slide, Marianne. And elderflower, which of course is just doing its beautiful thing at the minute. And of course, I never forget about elderflower to me and the Welsh, because the Welsh are actually sort of slightly frightened of this plant. It's known as the maiden, the mother and the crone, so it's got all sorts of herbal and folklore connotations to it. It's supposed to be strong character. You shouldn't pick it unless it actually allows you to pick it. So whenever you approach it with caution. Make sure it's in a good mood. Make sure it's allowing you to pick it. If you find you're going up to it like it's very windy, perhaps you walk away and you pick another elderflower. It's just always treat it with respect, was what I have always been told about elderflower. But it's a very useful herb. This is a herb that I used, as I was saying the last time, for the menopause. I don't know why, but this herb worked for me. It seemed to control the hot flushes. And what I was taught by the herbal course I was on, that if you're treating the top part of your body, so say you've got like a lung problem, you should take your tea hot. So if you're treating like migraines or sinuses or your headaches, you take your teas hot up to your waistline. If you're treating the lower part of your body, you should take your teas cold. So what I used to do with elderflower was I used to make the teas and let them infuse for about half an hour, and then I would put them into a jug and put them in the fridge. And I would have drank that for probably a couple of days, and I would have been making another one at the same time. And actually, it's slightly astringent, but after a while, I actually quite liked the taste of it. I acclimatized to it, and I would still drink elderflower tea every now and again in the summer months, just for that sort of nice, refreshing taste coming out of the fridge. I wouldn't drink it hot; I would drink it cold, because that's what I'd done for about a couple of years, and it seemed to control my hot flushes at that stage. And I say, quite often you'll find with herbs, you know, even they're native, they're not native, not all herbs work for everyone. And you should always start off with a single herb if you're treating something and see how you get on with it. And you need to give yourself 2 or 3 weeks probably to find out if it's actually, you know, starting to build up enough in your body to be of benefit to you. So it's not something you just use for a couple of days and then say, oh, that's not working. So you'll find with most herbs that because you're treating, the whole herb is treating you, like the hawthorn, for instance, you know, you're getting the wholeness of the herb. So it's not something that's been extracted out of it that makes it very, very potent. You're using the whole herb. So they're actually in a weaker format in some respects, but they're balanced. So you do need to take them for a couple of weeks before you can really say whether they're making any benefit to you or not. So the elderflower was one that I used for that, and actually I use it as a tea as well for one of my soaps, because I just have such a respect for it. So whenever I started doing soaps, I wanted to bring out one of them that actually had elderflower in as a tea, just for that respect for the plant. There was, I think, one that we sort of missed on that one, which is comfrey. Comfrey is quite a pernicious growing plant. It will grow in hedgerows, it will grow on the edge of woodlands, gets to about 5 foot tall with blue flowers. It has a rough leaf, so the leaf is quite sort of like hairy on the top, not particularly pleasant to touch, and the stems also have like a hairiness. But comfrey is a fantastic herb to have close by. It wouldn't be one that I'd plant in the garden. It's quite strong. It has a very deep root system, and it could be quite a thug. So it's something, if you wanted to keep it going, I actually have it pots, to be honest, and I use a variety called Bocking 14. And Bocking 14 is one that doesn't set seed, so you don't have to worry about it seeding across into your neighbour's garden or seeding across into your own garden where it's starting to sort of run riot. So you'll have to sort of contain its root systems, but you don't have to worry about it seeding. But comfrey, by its very description of the old common name for it was knitbone. So you can imagine then what it was used for. So very useful plant for anyone who's had like sprains or even a break, that you should actually have the plant close to the break. So I know where we go to hospital and we get castor plaster on. I'm not saying you don't put a plaster cast on, but comfrey tea possibly used in around the ailment or the injury would be really, really useful to use. Very good for inflammation, obviously, so it stops the swelling. It's very good for skin health and to alleviate pain, and also, say, good for sprains. It's also a good plant to have on the allotment, because you can use comfrey to make a tea. Now this is a different tea. This is not a tea for us to drink, it's a tea for your plants. And what you'll do is you cut the comfrey down and put it into a bucket and just let the plant basically break down. It'll smell quite strongly, but if you let it break down, the juices that come out of that plant you then can use as a tonic, a pick-me-up tonic for all of your plants whenever you're watering them. So you use the comfrey tea infusion to 10 parts water, so it's quite a strong dilution. It'll stick to high heaven, but some people say up to 3 weeks. I believe it's 6 weeks in a bucket, and just let it sort of rot down into this sort of like gooey black mess, smelly gooey black mess, and it makes a great tea and a great pick me up. It's full of potassium, you see, which is really good for like tomatoes or any plants that you're wanting to produce fruit. Or berries, it's really good for something like that. So the other thing about elderflower, I should say as well, is that it has been used actually in a trial where they were using it as a sort of like a sterilization method for a hospital, believe it or not, to sort of treat the MSRA. And it was quite interesting because it's got bioflavonoids and anthocyanins in it, and they realised that actually that is very good for treating. So they were using it actually in a hospital. I think it must have been in South Ireland, and tested it to see if it actually would kill that virus, and it seemed to be very effective. So it's interesting. So we're now going on to picking, drying, and storing. Next slide, Marianne. Yes, this is me with the elderflower. So as you can see, I just use a bag, write the name on, pop it in, and it basically leave it in the airing cupboard for a full month or even 6 weeks if you haven't got much heat on in summer, and it will come out like this. And what I use is just a fork. So if you have a fork and pop it into a paper bag, you can sort of like just take the sort of it takes the stems out, especially if you're making a tea. One thing just to watch out for is when you're using dried herbs in comparison to fresh herbs, you only need half the amount of the dried herb, because that dried herb will have decreased in size and decreased in weight, but actually will be equally as potent. So if you're, for instance, if you were using, say, thyme in a recipe, and it said something like 1 teaspoonful of fresh thyme, you'd only use half a teaspoonful if your thyme was dried. So it's basically half on your dosage weight of what you'd be using. Next slide, Marianne. Making a tea. Okay, next slide. So this is me making a spearmint and peppermint tea. Now I like not to wash the herbs whenever I bring them in, because they're full of the oils in around the leaf, the back of the leaf. But what I do is I just have a wee look down the stems just to make sure that there isn't some creatures in them. And you can see in that top right hand slide, which is the one of the spearmint, there's a bit of that, the cuckoo spit that you get with a little insect inside. So what I did was I scraped that away and scraped the insect out before, and I just checked them all for that, because sometimes you see it on the plant, sometimes you don't. It can be just below a leaf. But again, you just want to, if you have to wash them, you have to wash them. But I like to be able just to give them a shake. And bring them in where I'm not having to put water on them until I'm putting them into the teapot. Now, I'm just using like a handful there and putting it into that teapot. So it's made roughly about, I think that's about half a litre of tea for me there. And I let that infuse for a good 10 or 15 minutes. I boil the kettle, and I pour the tea. When I'm pouring the water into the teapot, I pour it high, where it's getting lots of oxygen into it, and I put the lid on the teapot and let it sit for about 15 minutes or so on the shelf. Of course, I'm drinking this cold, so I don't worry about it getting cold. If you're wanting to drink a tea and it was hot and it was maybe going to be for a sore throat, you probably do want to have the temperature. So you would only infuse it for about 10 minutes. And then at that stage, I just pop it into the fridge and it'll sit in the fridge until it's cool. And then I'll drink it sort of slightly later on. So making a tea is as simple as that. It's basically an infusion of boiling water onto a herb. Okay, next slide, Marianne. Again, this is marigold, and you can see marigold will, that's 21 grams of marigold, which is probably about 20 heads. But if I was using that as a dried herb, it would, 21 grams would be an awful amount of marigold. So I would probably be using maybe even just a quarter of that to do something, because there's a lot of herb going into produce dried marigolds, because they go into nothing. You know, they're very small whenever they're dried up, and they've already sort of come off the foliage and everything as well. Next slide, Marianne. And that's the marigold tea. Marigold tea turns this really weird colour. I use this in a soap, and it's really quite an odd one. It turns like a purpley pink, and it sort of goes a very odd colour, and yet, you know, the herb is actually yellow and orange. So, but it turns this odd colour whenever you put the hot water in, which I don't know why. It's just obviously how the herbs take up the water. And also, you know, it's nice whenever you make a herbal tea or you make an infusion of oil and you see the herb in your finished tea or product, you know that it's the same with the tinctures. You know, you're using a vodka clear base, and it's not clear by the time you're finished with your herb, so you know your herb has gone into it. Next slide, Marianne. So infusing oils. This was just an experiment I did a week or so ago just for this. This is what I use actually in one of my soaps to colour. This is a luscious lavender, and this is alkanet root, which you'll see in the bottom right hand side. Now, alkanet root we can't grow in this country. It's an Indian herb, and I buy it dried. And what I do is I infuse the olive oil into the alkanet root for a full month, and it colours the soap that gorgeous colour when it's finished. So it's natural colour just by infusing your oil in with your herb. And then I just take that out. I use cheesecloth and take the herb out of the oil before I put it into the soap. It would really stain your clothes, but like blackberries I suppose as well. But the good thing is it stays that nice colour in the soap. It doesn't go brown, which a lot of herbs do go brown in soaps. So it's always hard to get a natural colour that's not brown in a soap. Very easy to get brown. Next slide, Marianne. So the marigolds, again, I grow copious amounts of these. I love using them. And marigold, again, is a lovely herb. It's really strong with anti-inflammatory. So again, it's a plant that I would use if I got bit or stung by something. If there was a marigold at hand, I would use the marigold petals. Again, rubbing them onto wherever you've been bitten or stung, or a rash or an itchy, something that's itchy, put your marigolds on, and it's got also pain relief built into it as well. So like the plantain, it will work the same way. So it's nice sometimes to use a combination of herbs that actually have similar uses. So I've made a salve, which I think I have slides on, which I just took it to another level. So to infuse the marigold into the oil, this is just what I do. So this is probably olive oil, and I heat that very, very gently. So you can see there in the background, it's sitting at 2 on the hob. It's a very, very light temperature. You don't want to boil your oil, you know, especially if you're using olive oil or expensive oils that have also got their own benefits to your skin from the olive tree itself. So there's no point in actually overcooking or heating up your oil unduly. You just want it to infuse. Quite often whenever I'm doing an oil like this, I will actually do it over a couple of days. So I'll bring it up to a very light simmer for about 10 minutes or so, and then I'll just turn the heat off. And then I'll do that for about a couple of days. Every time I'm back in the kitchen, I'll just put it on for a few minutes. let it heat up again, then let it cool down. You can also do a solar oil in the same way. So you can put your marigolds into your oil in a jam jar, and you can put them on a sunny window, or you can even put them outside. Just make sure that the water doesn't get in near it. And you can infuse them in oil, but you would need to do it for about a full month of nice dry weather. It'd be lovely to do it in South France. But you're actually, the benefit of that is you're not actually applying a lot of heat to the oil, except whatever the sun's rays are. But I find in our climate quite often it's better just to give it a little bit of a force heat. I sometimes do them in the slow cooker as well. It's another easy way of doing them. And slow cooker does them over a 12-hour period, and then slowly cools them down again. And it's a good way of doing your oils in a very low temperature in the slow cooker, just in jam jars. I do that for the body butters in the winter months. Next slide, Marianne. So to make a balm, what I did was I infused 10 grams of plantain leaf and 4 grams of the calendula, or the marigold. They were dried, so obviously I didn't put the full amount, which would have been 5 grams, and I just put 4 grams in because I thought that was enough. And I put that into 100 grams of oil. Now I used safflower oil. You could use sunflower oil, you could use olive oil. I use safflower oil because safflower oil is a very light oil and it goes into your skin really readily, which is probably what I wanted. So I didn't want a heavy oil that sort of hung on top of your skin a lot, because a balm, basically, really what it is, it's infused herbal oil with beeswax. And the beeswax hardens it. Now, if you notice there, you can see where I've just put a fork across the top of it as it was cooling. And really what I wanted was, I didn't want a really hard, if you put beeswax in at too high a percentage, it actually makes it go rock hard. And I don't like it like that, because it's too hard to get out of the tin and it's too hard to spread on your skin. So I wanted it sort of slightly softer than that. Normally what you would do is you would use 1 gram of beeswax, 10 grams of oil. Now, by the time I did that whole infusion, I ended up with 70 grams of oil. So instead of putting 7 grams of beeswax in, I actually only put 5 in. So, and that was just because I wanted to make it sort of slightly lighter in texture. And as you can see, I probably just managed to get that nicely. And I can turn the whole jar upside down and nothing falls out. So it's sort of just that nice sort of temperature level. It'll be easy to spread on my skin if I get bitten by something. So again, this is a really good anti-inflammatory, anti-itching, and also pain relief for any bites or stings. So it's a really good one to have. Again, I would say shelf life of a balm, because of course it's an infused oil, would be roughly about a year, because your oil will go off as well. I also put, I don't think it was 2 grams actually, I think that was too much. I think I put about 5 drops in, which was probably about 1/4 teaspoon, because again, it's only 70 grams of oil. It wasn't a huge tub that I made. So I put 2 grams there, but I think that might be a little bit much. And say just lightly, again, lavender just is, it's nice and soothing, especially if you're going to put it on a child perhaps. It gives a nice sort of scent and calms them down if they're a bit annoyed because something's happened, or they've got bitten by something, or they've got stung by a nettle. Something like that is really quite nice. And again, I think sometimes whenever you're applying something to your skin, it's even just that process of rubbing your skin when it gets sore, and it's like giving yourself a hug in a way, isn't it? There is this sort of idea, you know, that you're helping yourself because you're rubbing something into your skin. It's all part of psychology, but you're helping yourself. And you certainly are with these plants, because these plants are going to bring pain relief and they're going to stop the swelling, and you'll probably not get the horrible effects that you normally would get from a bite. And I say the horseflies are ones that I would particularly have quite a reaction to. I see me getting bitten by a horsefly and my whole arm, lower part of my arm, would go up and be really quite swollen for most of the week. And I find with all of these herbal remedies, as long as you get them on pretty quickly to whenever you've gotten bitten, which is why I sort of look around in the verge for what plant I want to use. If you get them on fairly quickly within the first maybe 10-15 minutes of getting bitten, they really don't allow the inflammation to get built up, and it means that you don't get that burning sensation of all the blood flowing to it and the swelling, and then the itchiness that occurs after that. So it seems to stop all of that, and you just apply it whenever you need to apply it. So you might have to apply it 5 or 6 times in the first hour, or you might need to apply it for a couple of times over the first day or so, and then after that it just seems to heal itself. So there, it's a brilliant way sort of go for remedy in the cupboard just to have. So if I was any of you, would get that made over the next couple of days for the horse flies come out, because it's a season for them now. Okay, Marianne, next slide. So what am I doing here? I've forgotten. Oh yes, this is me actually making, that's the bottom right is me actually making the oil. So it's a very, very gentle simmer, and that actually is the plantain leaf on the chopping board, as you can see on the bigger photograph. That's the shape of the plantain leaf there, and that the marigold petals you can see actually in the top right hand photograph as well, and that safflower oil is the oil that I used just to make the balm. So that's all was in that, and a little bit of beeswax and a spot of lavender, and there you have a really good natural remedy. And that's just how it looked as I was making it. So the herbs in the oils, and then the top photograph is the beeswax added to the oil after I had taken the herbs out. So I just put it through a little bit of cheesecloth or muslin, and then the bottom one is actually the finished product in a tin. So I have it then for this season to treat myself. Okay, a herbal vinegar made in a very similar way. So you've got your herbs, you've got your vinegar, and I'm using an apple cider vinegar, of course, so I like to use apple cider vinegar. And I have put a mix, I think that is chamomile flowers, and of course nettle is going into it as well. So what I do is I just let these infuse in the apple cider vinegar for a full month again, and they just infuse nicely into it, and they actually really darken the vinegar. Nettle in particular puts it into really quite a dark colour. Quite interesting, just with the nettle in it. Next slide, Marianne. So making tinctures. Again, the easy remedy. This is something that I use because I have like a Raynaud's, which is a circulation problem. I haven't been able to use any sort of native herbs for it. So it's something I need to heat myself up all the time. And in the winter months, I would be very prone to chilblains. So I use 2 herbs, actually both that are Chinese. So ginkgo, the ginkgo herb, and gotcha cola is the other herb. So I have to buy these off the internet. I just hope that somebody's thanked the plant. And I use vodka out of Lidl's. It doesn't have to be expensive Bombay Sapphire. Any vodka will do. And what I do is I just fill the jam jar up with the herb. Now, what I use with this is I use the same amount of each herb. So I just usually put them in as tablespoons. So it's maybe like 3 tablespoonfuls of each. And then I just top it up with vodka. It's just covered the herbs and a little bit extra, because don't forget these are dried herbs, so they are going to swell up whenever they've gone into the liquid. And what you want to make sure is that in a couple of days' time that the liquid or the vodka is still covering the herb, that the herb hasn't sort of sucked up so much vodka that it's going to sit and maybe go rancid. So it needs to stay below the line of the vodka. So I just give it an extra sort of like little bit on top. But don't worry if you don't quite sure what you're doing, because in a day or two's time, just take it out of the cupboard and have another look and make sure that it still has enough vodka in it to cover all of the herb. and if I have to just add a little bit of extra in. I give it a good shake up at that stage, and I write a date on it so that I can remember when I've made it. And I will start to take this herb about September time. And what I do, of course, I leave it for a full calendar month, and then of course I will decant the vodka out, and it will turn like a brownie color. So you know that the herb has gone into the vodka. And I take it every morning from September right through to about March, end of March into April time, just whenever the weather's starting to warm up again. And I take about a teaspoonful into, you can either put it into hot water if you want to, just a little bit of hot water to evaporate the alcohol, or you just put it into cold water. I just put it into cold water and drink it down. Now, it's not particularly pleasant, but like all of these sort of things, if you're just taking like a quick shot in the morning, it'll go. Oh, Marianne's left. Oh dear.
No, I haven't
the slides
left.
have left too.
The slides
Oh,
are left, but not the iPad
Well,
died. I'm so sorry.
Okay. Well, I think we're probably close to the end anyway, because we sort of covered most of the tinctures there as well. I can't remember what the rest of the slides were.
I think that was actually, I think there was only one more.
Was there one more? I don't know.
But I think it was just pictures of this.
Oh, could have been, yeah. Free update, not now. I don't want a free update. Let's hope it doesn't take forever. Oh, no, it's okay. Oh, I tell you what it was. Yeah, the next slide just was actually horseradish, which is the plant that I have in the garden. Again, it's a plant that's very good for anybody that's had wasabi would know what horseradish was. It's quite a burny herb. And there was just, which you probably can share with the group anyway, there was a little pick-me-up tonic that you could make with the horseradish for the winter months. You know, where you can use like elderflower. I would make or an elderberry. I would use like an elderberry rob in I think about September time with the berries, and you just put like ginger, and you put cinnamon in it, and a little bit of sugar, and you can make up this it's a bit like a jam in a way, and you put it in the fridge and you have it the whole of the winter, and every time you get a bit of a sore throat, you can have a little bit of a hot drink with the elderberry, and it's a nice sort of pick up for the immune system. You know, like people use echinacea for the same way, but echinacea never worked for me. So I found, again, I have to run to the Irish plants. So the elderberry works for me. So I think that's probably it. And did it record, Marianne?